You're going to begin painting your monster sculpture today. So some things that you should know about the paint we're using. It is acrylic paint and it dries permanent on clothing. So I would roll up long sleeves and I would put on an apron just to kind of protect your clothing. So when you come to a table to paint, you're going to decide what surface is best to begin painting first. Remember that you have to store this inside the cabinet still even when you're painting. So consider what surface it's going to be resting on. If you need to tip your project sideways to fit it in the cabinet, remember that you're going to want a dry surface for it to rest on top of for that particular drying phase. So you might be painting it at an angle today to leave a dry surface so that you can put it in the cabinet. And then next class you might flip it over this direction and then paint it on the opposite side so that when it's meant to be displayed, you've got paint on all the surfaces. And then you might consider looking at your rough draft drawing and trying to figure out what paint colors do you want to work with. It's okay to change your mind, but my plan was that I was going to use the warm colors. So I wanted it to be orange at the base and fade into red and then into pink, and then there was going to be yellow on the top with all these different eyeballs. So you need to figure out what color you want to work with for the base color of your project first, and that's the only paint color I want you to get for class time today. So for me, I'm going to be using orange and red to start out with, and that's all I'm going to get on my plate to begin with. So each student is getting a styrofoam plate. This is your plate to use for the remainder of the project. You need to use a marker and write your name on the back so that we know whose project this is when we or rather we know whose paint palette this is throughout the duration of the project. So then you can go to table 3, which is the painting table, and I have recycled Gatorade bottles that I have filled with paint, and there's a hole drilled in the top, so all you have to do is shake the bottle to get the paint to drop to the end and then squeeze the hole. If the paint is not coming out of the top, stop and bring me that bottle so I can unclog it. The one thing you don't want to do is keep squeezing it as hard as you can, because then the paint eventually explodes out of the lid and paint goes everywhere. So I'm going to take my plate to the painting table, and then I'm going to decide what color I want to work with. I'm going to shake the bottle, and you'll feel the paint drop to the lid. And then I'm just going to squirt out some paint on my plate. Now, you need to kind of decide how much are you painting on this surface to know how much paint to put on your plate. If you're going to be using this color on the majority of the surface, then you might get a chicken nugget size amount of paint on your plate. You could always get more paint as you need it, but I don't want you to be wasting a bunch of paint. So my plan was that I was going to be fading from orange up to the base. So I'm going to start by putting orange down first. So I like to always kind of get my paintbrush wet, number one, to make sure that it is clean. So in your tables, you've got these Tupperwares with a floating sponge. I would swish that around and then just kind of wipe that off on the sponge. And then I like to check just on a piece of paper towel, is that paintbrush clean? Now this paintbrush is stained, so the bristles are permanently pink, but there's no pink coming off on the paper towel, so I know it's actually a clean paintbrush. I would not trust that the class ahead of you cleaned it appropriately. So I would always wash your brush, clean your brush, and then it's got a little bit of water on there to help spread that paint. So these are really large paintbrushes. Even though it's super long, like the size of a ruler, I still like to hold the brush down low, close to this metal piece where it's holding the bristles. I have more control when I brush, or when I hold the paintbrush this way, instead of holding the paintbrush at the very end and trying to paint with the very end of the brush. So I'm going to hold it down low. All right, then I'm going to load my paintbrush. I'm just going to get paint on the end of that brush. And I should never overload my brush, meaning there's paint jammed inside this metal piece. You just want paint on the very end. And then when I paint, I'm going to want to paint in brush strokes. So I'm just going to set my brush on the plaster and pull away from where the bristles are. Now I might have to turn my brush so that I get more paint on the surface. So I'm always constantly kind of pulling away from the end of the bristles. I could turn my hand this way and pull back in this way. But as you paint, you want to thoroughly cover all of the plaster. I should not see white specks of plaster through your paint. So you might need to tip your project as you paint to get it thoroughly coated. Now, the number one mistake that I see students make in terms of taking care of the paintbrush is they push the paintbrush. Meaning they get paint on their brush, and instead of pulling back, they push the brush forward. So they're constantly smashing the end of the paint bristles, and that's just going to change the shape, of the paintbrush. And it's going to smash the bristles so that eventually these bristles are all stuck out in this like splayed out effect, and then it ruins the end of the brush. So don't push the paint with your brush, pull the brush back. So the paint we're using is acrylic paint, and it's going to dry permanently on the surface of your project. But a really nice feature of acrylic paint is that you can blend colors when they are wet. So I am going to show you what I mean. So in my example, mine fades from orange into red. So when I want to make that fade, here's what I'm going to do. So it's going to fade kind of in this general area. If my red paint is wet and my orange paint is wet, those two, when they touch, they can mix together. So I'm going to need to get some red paint on my palette, and I'm going to clean my brush up. So I'm going to swish it in the bucket, dragging it on the bottom of the bucket, and then I'm dragging it across the top of the sponge to kind of pull the rest of the color out. And then I'm going to go get red paint from the paint table where I put some red in its own spot. And now I'm going to paint red right next to this orange. And if the colors are wet, they will mix together. So then I'm going to paint some red over the top of the orange. I could dip back orange and paint over the red. And those two are going to mix and make a really nice red-orange color. And then I have a similar concept where the red is going to fade into the pink. So if I want the red to fade into the pink, then I'm going to get some pink on my plate. I'm going to clean my brush, swish it around, wipe it across the top of the sponge so I don't see any color. And then now I'm going to paint that pink right next to the red, and I'm going to let those two mix, where I paint pink over the top of the red, I might do red over the top of the pink, and then I'm just going to switch to all pink towards the top. So this is how I can create a fade effect. So it faded from orange into red into pink. So I'm going to show you the best way to mix a color on your plate if you're needing to make new colors, if you're not going to mix it on the project itself. So if I want to lighten the color, I need to add white into the color. If I want to darken the color, I'm going to add black into the color. So the best thing to do is to get white in its own spot on your plate and black on its own spot on your plate. All right, now that I have white and black, I'm ready to show you how to mix these colors. So if I want to create a really, really light pink, for example, the best way to mix the color is to always mix the darker color into the lighter color. So what I'm going to do is use the end of my paintbrush handle. I'm going to scoop out some of that color, and then I'm going to mix it into my white. And if I need a large amount of this color, I'm going to use quite a bit of white to begin with. And then I can look at that and decide, is that bright enough? If it's not bright enough, then I'm just going to scoop more of this color into the white. If you are not making the color easily, stop what you're doing and come ask me for help, because I don't want you wasting a ton of paint trying to mix a color. So if I wanted to darken the color, and then when I'm done mixing, I just wipe off the end of my paintbrush handle with my paper towel. If I want to darken a color, I always want to put the darker color into the lighter color. So I would take a tiny bit of black and mix it into this color. It does not take a lot of black to darken a color. It changes it really, really quickly, so just use small bits of black at a time. So you can see how this is pink with black and pink with white. We call the black a shade of pink. We call the white a tint of pink. So that is the best way to go about mixing paint colors. Use the end of your paintbrush to do the mixing, put the dark color into the light color, and then just wipe off your brush. Okay, at the end of class, let's talk about what we need to do for cleanup. So you need to decide, can you still use these paint colors? If you're done using these paint colors and you don't need them anymore, you can see if somebody else around you could use those paint colors, and then you can wipe this plate clean if you're done using the colors. But hopefully you can save these paint colors and use them again in another class period. So if you're going to save paint colors, what we're going to do is just get a piece of tin foil, and you're going to set the tin foil over the top of your plate, and then you're just going to kind of wrap that under the plate. And your name is on the back, so you know whose plate is who. And then you can keep this plate with your project, or keep this plate where your art folder is, so that next class you still use the same. So you'll use the same plate if you're keeping it with the tin foil on the top. If you are done using that paint color, nobody else can use it, then what you'll do is you'll take your paper towel and you're just going to wipe the paint off of the plate, throw the paper towel away, and leave this paint plate with your project to dry overnight. This will dry rock hard, and then you can put fresh new color on top of that color and keep using the exact same plate until the project is over. Then you need to go move projects and plates to your shelf. You need to come back to your table and finish cleaning all your paint brushes. You need to make sure that all the brushes are clean, swish them around the bottom, wipe them across the sponge, and then test it on paper towel, or you could even test it like on the back of your hand. If there's paint coming off on your skin, you know it's not clean. You need to swish it around and wipe it on that sponge again, and now I know that's clean. And then those are just going to go inside the tray at your table with paintbrushes. One person needs to empty the water buckets and bring the water buckets back to your table, and then I will be dismissing you.